Good morning, everyone. It's a long stop before lunch, so I'll try to not keep you guys too long here. I spent a considerable amount of time last night refactoring everything. I drank a lot of coffee, so if I'm a bit jitter, I'm sorry. I'll just do my best, and I tweaked these as much as I could into notes. So if I'm not looking too much into the audience, it's not that I'm trying to avoid any of you, it's just I'm trying to give you the most information that I can with this amount of time. So the next 40 minutes or so, I'll try to amuse you with a question. What happens if you suddenly get hit by a bus? What happens if today you vanish from your company? What is going to happen to your projects, to your company, and to your business, basically? Monday morning, you can all bring these ideas to the office and make everyone panic just a bit. My name is Aléxio. I'm from Portugal, as you can tell by my accent. I'm a mobile developer first, but I do a lot of stacks, for better or for worse. And you can find me on the usual social networks, although it's cutting a bit. It's just missing an S there, but I'll blame it on the projector. I'm currently looking for a new job, so if you know anything, just let me know. I do just about everything. That said, this idea for this presentation started last year. I was talking with this gentleman over here, Adam. Say hello to the people.
Hey, it's not my fault.
We're just talking that basically I was the sole developer in my company, and if something happened, God forbid, there's documentation, but there will still be a big role to fill because I just covered everything from front end, back end, DevOps, database management, server management. It could just be like a whole team's job just on my shoulders. And although we did everything that we could to make sure that everything went smoothly, something could go wrong. They need to hire someone to fill a lot of roles, finding all the documentation. And then from there, he started to get this idea of, is there other companies there? Is there other people there that are supporting a lot of companies? And something happens, there is no contingency plan. There is nothing holding the company in a way that someone can just be hired and fill out that role. So basically that's how we started the idea, but I steered a bit away from just that and also started to look into other factors that could impact projects, such as, okay, what if you hire a so-called rock star? What if the whole project is just on the shoulders of someone that just is not cooperating with the whole team? And you end up with a project that no one can touch, or no one wants to touch. And, well, somehow the company is stuck now between a project and a developer. But before that, let's look into what is buzz factor. That's the title of the show. Buzz factor essentially is a measurement of the number of people in your team that get hit by a bus before your project comes to a halt. It doesn't need to be a bus, but for this purpose it is a bus. Lower is bad, high is good. That's how the numbers goes. So on my example, the number in my previous company would be 1. It just needs to be me hit by a bus, and the whole thing could just collapse. It could also be my boss hit by a bus, and the whole company would collapse because he would just manage just about every single role. It was a very small company, I must say. So I invite you to think about this. Can you just think about in your company, or if you work for yourself, you have your number there, how many people are the driving, or like the number that needs to be hit so that the project just goes. There are other types of factors, as we mentioned. You have the rock stars. Does anyone have permission to alter the projects of the rock star? Because sometimes the ownership is taken to an extreme. They just own the project and you cannot touch anything unless they say so. What we have? We have the knowledge base, which sometimes they'll be the experts of the project, and no one else knows the technology. Not anyone wants to, because they decided on the most shiniest of libraries, on the very specific niche things, and no one else knows it. Does they follow the company's code standards? Because sometimes companies will agree on certain standards for everyone to work it, but they kind of bend the rules a bit, and I'll do this my way. And therefore, everyone needs to know kind of how to deal with them. There's also another type of plus factor, which is the obsolete modules. We have sometimes outdated packages that always worked before, but they have been shown on NPM logs as critical for a while. And day by day, they became more dangerous, but no one wants to touch them because it has always been working. You don't touch the module, you just go around. Basically, everyone wants to remove, but no one actually does it. And management always typically say, well, we'll do it after the next deadline, which never comes. And good practice are thrown out the window so that no one disturbs the module, like this little kitten. And the module must survive above all else, or else you need to create a new project. And sometimes management do not want to spend more time and money into developing new things. So, preventing software development as itself, it's hard. You can just cannot contribute to make our project's life longer and healthier by making sure that we don't do the usual pitfalls. Because sometimes, to certain degrees of implementation, we can have more or less rock stars. You might be yourselves a rock star, you don't know about it. And that could be an issue. So, steps that we can take to prevent this would be to have more than one team member just sharing the knowledge. Because it makes sense, even in the context of just going on holidays. You want to make sure that you're not interrupted. If you're with your family, it's a good time just to disconnect from the company. You don't need to be constantly thinking, well, I might get a message, something might go wrong, I might need to do X, Y, Z. So it's a good thing just to have at least another member that you can rely on. Documentation is essential because something happens, God forbid, everyone needs to know which password and which server, which IP you need to access to fix it. And it's not just tests, as in you do unit tests, but rather you test the documentation. Because sometimes people would ask you, oh, you document this feature, you type something on Word and call it a day. But if you try to actually replicate those steps, you'll find that there's mistakes, there's not like, some updates change things, and you actually cannot follow those documentations that you actually wrote. So that's an important step. Emergency plan is also very good to have at hand. I had my experience with the internet being cut on a server room. No one could reach out to the person. So it is important to know what to do when problems arise. And please keep your libraries and all your software updated. Otherwise, you get a big fat kitten to take care of. Post-factor is great. It's a good way to just quickly assert if a company is in trouble or not in the next couple of days. But there are also other things that suddenly happens that unfortunately we cannot prevent them. The best thing we can do is just be prepared and basically deal with the situation as best as possible. So I've compiled a couple of situations here that I found it was interesting how it seemed that it was so small, so insignificant, and yet it just broke down the whole thing. The projector doesn't do a good justice to the picture of this gentleman. It's Azer Kosulu, I believe I'm pronouncing it correctly, I hope. He made a package called LeftPad. That's why I put this on the left. It's a complex situation, but I'll try to summarize it as best as I can. He is a prolific software developer that did a lot of packages for the community. And one of the packages was called Kick. And basically what he wanted to do was to create an open source project. That's all it's known about what he wanted to do. And he created that space on NPM as one do, just allocated the space, the project's there ready for his implementation. But there was a company called Kick Messenger that wanted that space. And at the time, the company contacted Azure, but he didn't want to give up his name because it was like, why would I give up this? I allocated this, I was here first. And the company, the company, went to NPM, and NPM said, well, we're going to favor the company now, and we're going to give the right of Kick to the company instead of the gentleman that was there first. And Azure was not very happy because he believed a lot in open source, fairness, and the community. So in act of revenge, he basically removed all this code from NPM, which usually would be fine. I would say if any one of us would remove a package, it would be just any other day. But the problem is that he removed 273 packages, which is a very big number. I don't think I've ever done, or anyone here, I'm not sure, these many contributions to the internet. But between those packages, there was one called LeftPatch. And the problem was that there was a lot of packages that depended on this. So LeftPatch is just this, it's just 11 lines of code. And what it does is, you have a string, you have the length of the space that you want to add to the left, and you have the character. And basically that's all it does. But I couldn't find an exact number of packages that implemented this, but Babel used it, and consequently Node, everything that used basically Node.js or JavaScript would use this. And so basically, it just came to an halt on, I didn't put a concrete date here. Yeah, that is weird. I should have put that, I'm sorry. But basically, the day that the package were removed from NPM, the whole internet could not build a single program. Like Facebook, everything that could use a sort of Node kind of component would just come to an halt. Now, there was a lot of consequences, a lot of things that had to change. NPM, for instance, reverted back his decision just to make sure that everything could still continue to work on the internet. And it made sure that introduced some new kind of policies so that people could not just break the whole internet just because they removed the package. Again, there was like a lot of debate, like some people were in favor of Azure, other people were in favor of Node because it was a small company, it was a big company, it had an actual project, it didn't have a project, but still, there's a bit of debate. I just invite you to read yourselves and take a look at the policies that it was introduced, which is very interesting because now, if you delete something, it will still be around just in case you might broke the internet somehow. We have now a bigger one, which is NASA's Climate Orbiter. It was in 1999. You can see it there, but I'm pretty sure you believe me now. Essentially, there was 3 components to this program. This one was the middle one. There was a first one called Mars Global Surveyor and in 1996, and after this one was the Mars Polar Lander in 1999. And the idea would be that they would launch this and we would go into orbit with Mars and just monitor Mars. There was plans for the future to be a relay of information, keep it in Mars, but obviously because it's in here, the plan does not go as intended. So what happened is, as it was trying to get into orbit, it goes basically between Earth, Mars, and it goes around, and there's an area that you cannot communicate with satellite. And during that time, you just have to rely on whatever orders you add to the climate orbiter. So, unfortunately, there's no information there, but I'll clarify you. On the 11th of December 1998, the Mars Climate climate orbiter was launched, designed to study Mars from orbit and service communications relay to Mars oil lander and deep space probes. At 9, it began going around Mars, which was planned, and suddenly when it came out, it didn't communicate back. So what happened? Apparently, somewhere, the guys that built this orbiter decided that instead of using the international system, they use what is called an English units, which is pounds per second. I never heard of this before, to be honest. But it made sure that when NASA tried to communicate in the international units, basically it was actually communicating the wrong measurements to the probe, which made it crash into Mars. So this little mistake that no one caught cost, let me just codify because there's a lot of numbers, 327 million in total. That's including not just the spaceship, but management of the mission, launching it, everything in between this, just because Lockheed Martin decided to use English language, which I don't know how. It just, even I read the articles that said that came out of testing and other sorts of quality assurance really well. Now, the funny thing about this is that NASA itself it's got a bit, but the gist of it is that NASA itself does not blame Lockheed Martin for this. Because they said the problem here was not the error, it was the failure that NASA system engineering and the checks and balances in our process to detect the error. That's why we lost the spacecraft. That's what Edward Wilner said. So it's interesting that NASA, instead of just trying to blame this on the manufacturer, decided that no, actually the problem is ours because we had the responsibility to test everything before we go into the mission. Which sometimes, I think it's a good analogy to what we do in software development, because sometimes we just take for granted certain things and it's just, oh yeah, it's not my fault, it's the program's fault, or it's the software fault, or the laptop. You're on my laptop, fine. But we sometimes forgot this responsibility of, okay, let's just make sure that everything is all right when we decide to run our things. Perhaps like a better example of a certain simple thing that we should do. It was the PlayStation Network outage in 2011. I don't know if you're aware of this. I was, because at the time I had a PlayStation 3. I had some free games, fortunately enough. But I didn't grasp until later what it was. Essentially, it's a big story behind it. I invite you to read about George Watts, which is the iPhone jailbreaking guy. Basically, was the first one to actually make the exploitation of that. And it moved to bigger things, such as the PlayStation 3. And Sony at the time decided, instead of trying to fix it, you just remove one functionality, which was you could install Linux on PlayStation 3s. There was even examples of PlayStation 3s being bought and used it as mainframes because it worked cheaper than those, and you basically just put Linux and it worked fine. And at the time, the hacker group Anonymous talked about not liking this policy too much. They mentioned a lot, but we'll see by the end, basically, they said this is not our fault. Someone did it, it wasn't us. Basically, what happened was that there was a hack in the PlayStation Network. Sony took a whole week to make everyone aware of what happened, and the consequences were that there was a lot of compromises. There was 77 million PSN accounts. The PSN is just the network itself, like the PlayStation Network itself. But there's also Sony Entertainment Online, or Sony Online Entertainment accounts that were compromised. Apparently the European ones were the only ones that had the credit card numbers compromised. I don't know why it was just European ones. That's what was reported. And the whole network was down for 23 days until they can finally put the network up. And worse than that was that they implemented, fortunate enough, a policy that you had to restart your email password. Basically, you have to, as usually you do, it's just like, well, there was compromised, change the password. But the servers could not handle the load, and the service was down again because everyone tried to reset the password at the same time. They were clearly prepared for all of this. Now, the problems with this is not just it was hacked, it was that millions of people's data was compromised. It was usernames, it was home addresses, credit card numbers, purchase histories, billing, just everything that could compromise a whole person was on that system. And it could be easily preventable because one of the issues was that it was running on outdated software. They cite an example which is OpenSSH was running on a lower version at the time. I believe this was in 2011. It was running at 4.4 and it was already at the time at 5.7, which extensive documentation of exploitations online ready available. This is something that sometimes I see on old projects is that they will run fine, but that is just not enough sometimes when everything is exposed to the internet. Sometimes it just takes one random IP address or a random address coming to someone's attention, and you can have a Sony kind of deal, which ends up costing 171 million in costs. So the next kind of big thing that I'm predicting that could happen is the 2038, the Y2000, they didn't abbreviate this one, Y2038 bug, which will be the integer numbers will just run out of digits, and we need to move everything to 64 bits, which some software has not done yet. So that should be the big thing that could happen in the future. It will be up to us to keep ourselves aware and to minimize the risks of blowing up stuff. It will probably not be as big as it once was, because there was a different time back then. There was no this reach of the internet thing. So we'll see how that goes. And somehow I did this way faster than I did on my own. That was all of it.